A month into the war, Israel's military says it's fighting in the depths of Gaza City after encircling the northern part of the besieged Palestinian enclave. The war is the deadliest of 5 Gaza wars for both sides. Israel said its forces were operating in the heart of Gaza City 1 month after Hamas's bloody October 7th attacks, as the campaign to crush the Hamas militants intensifies. Netanyahu has also said that there will be no fuel deliveries to Gaza and no ceasefire unless more than 240 hostages held by Hamas are freed. The World Health Organization said an average of 160 children are killed every day in Gaza as a result of this war. The International Committee of the Red Cross demanded an end to the horrific suffering of civilians, especially children. Now, to discuss this further, we have with us Professor Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics, Clinton Institute, University College, Dublin. Sir, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Professor, it's been over a month of the Israel-Hamas war. There seems to be no respite in sight for the people of Gaza, who are quickly running out of fuel and water. What's your take on the situation?
Well, I must be honest with you and your viewers that until the Israeli war cabinet, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, decides either that they have, quote, destroyed Hamas, or that for some reason they will not carry on, we will have another month, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months, maybe more of this mass killing inside Gaza. You are talking about one of the most densely populated areas on Earth. You are talking about people, more than half the population of 2.3 million have now been displaced from their homes in the shelters run by the UN. There is one working toilet for 700 to 800 people. There is no bread. There is no bakery. The hospitals are at risk of running out of fuel for even the most basic of procedures. In other words, we have no alternative at this point other than watching the killing or the mass displacement of the Gazan population while Israel decides that it has to, again, destroy Hamas.
Well, Professor, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that he's not going to allow fuel into Gaza until all hostages are free. How do you think things will unfold on that front?
Well, you're going to continue to see international pressure on Israel to limit the operations. A lot of this pressure had been behind closed doors. The Americans are now letting it be known that President Biden has asked Prime Minister Netanyahu to suspend operations for 3 days, just for 3 days, to allow some humanitarian aid to get in. But of course, if Israel refuses to let fuel in, you're talking about the inability to provide basic services. Now, Israel's argument is that Hamas is stockpiling fuel, which I have no doubt that it is. Hamas wants to defend itself. It sees its priority being the military operation. But let's be honest here. As with other aspects of this violence, the use of fuel here is both by Hamas and by the Israeli leadership to keep the civilians and indeed the hostages in Gaza as real hostages. Hostages to the fact that they may actually, if they're not killed by the attacks, wind up starving or suffering until they reach the point of death.
Absolutely, Professor. In fact, I was just going to come to this. There is international pressure on Israel regarding its operations on ground in Gaza. There have been discussions on tactical pauses as well. Netanyahu has made it clear that there will be no all-out ceasefire. Do you think there will be any sort of a shift in the ground operations?
No, look, Israel is limiting our access to the internet, or limiting Gaza's access to the internet, which limits our ability to view what's going on. But the Israelis are being very open that they have now surrounded Gaza City and are moving into it, that there will be no halt to operations until, again, they have, quote, eliminated Hamas leaders and Hamas fighters. So I can't give you a way out here. I think the only possibility that could even shift the Israeli leadership just a bit is if you had universal agreement on the need for a ceasefire, not just a humanitarian pause, but a ceasefire. I don't think that we'll actually get a ceasefire, but I think if countries like the United States, like India, actually called for one, it might make the Israeli leadership think, are we willing to risk almost all of our international ties for this campaign?
All right. Well, the fact of the matter is that the humanitarian situation, it is deteriorating in Gaza. The United States has said that they are against reoccupying Gaza by Israel. It's not good for Israel as the war continues. What are the likely scenarios that may unfold going forward?
Well, first of all, the issue of reoccupation, Israeli reoccupation of Gaza, having left the Strip in 2005, uh, has been brought forward by Benjamin Netanyahu, who said in a speech to the nation that Israel will have to look after its security needs after it has, quote, defeated Hamas. That is code for occupation, as we have seen in the West Bank for decades. And of course, we see that under conditions of occupation, even if you don't have the killing on the scale that we see today, that the violence and the killing continues. The fundamental is this. You have got to, first of all, get to a point where you have a meaningful delivery of humanitarian aid throughout all of the Gaza Strip, delivery of humanitarian aid which bypasses Hamas. When you do that, you open up the space for talks between Palestine and Israel on a two-state solution. But I'll tell you this, we will not get any progress this until two things happen. One, Hamas is no longer in charge of Gaza. And two, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is no longer in power in Israel.
All right. Well, Professor Scott Lucas, thank you so much for joining us on WION with your perspective on this.
And thank you and your viewers.